saying, as a Syrian in Canada, I feel really privileged and I feel extremely lucky that I could stand here in this crowd, I could express my opinion, I could disagree with some of you and not fear for my life or the life of my loved ones. Because if this debate were to happen in Assad's Syria, my destiny would have been very likely the same destiny as the children in Dar'a, these children who started the popular uprising in Syria. These children wrote some graffiti inspired by what happened in Egypt, saying the people want to topple the regime. We're talking about 9 to 15 years old. The response of the security forces was immediate. They were taken to custody, they were detained, and according to a Human Rights Watch report that apparently my opponent there did not read as thoroughly as they read the report of Vladimir Putin, that report stated very clearly that these children were tortured using excessive beating and using electric shocks, and their fingernails, according to some witnesses, were extracted forcefully. So that's the kind of Assad Syria we're talking about. Or my destiny would have been very similar to the destiny of Ibrahim Qashush. That's the singer who chanted against the Syrian regime, and quickly enough, Syrian security forces kidnapped him, slaughtered him like sheep from ear to ear, extracted his throat, put his throat next to his body as a message to the Syrian people that you are not allowed to have a different opinion. But thank God I don't have to deal with this kind of oppression in Canada. And before I start today, I would like to outline my definition of what is an international intervention that the Syrian people are calling for. What kind of an international intervention that we're asking for and we're willing to support. After 2.5 years of the struggle in Syria, we have come to the realization that there is no political solution in Syria. Unfortunately, we have come to the realization, and we're very sad to have come to this, but we have come to the realization that an international intervention in Syria is needed and is required. And by intervention, I mean two things. The first is specific military strikes against the air bases, against the airports, and against the military bases from which Assad is launching strikes against the Syrian people. It's a strictly defensive attack. It's a strictly humanitarian strike. We're not asking for a full-scale war. We're not asking Obama or anybody to deploy troops in Syria. We're not asking for a de facto occupation of Syria. We're only asking for a no-fly zone over Syria so that Assad cannot use his forces to kill his own people. That's all we're asking for. The first reason I support an international intervention in Syria is the fact, and this is very important, the fact that international intervention is already there in Syria. First of all, you have Iran, who made it very clear. They made it very clear when they said that their Revolutionary Guard advisors are fighting alongside the Assad soldiers. They made it so clear, and they were not apologetic about it. Also, Hezbollah fighters are very proud of the fact that they're fighting with the Assad soldiers against the Syrian people. They're saying and making no apologies that even if it meant that the Syrian struggle will drag Lebanon into another civil war, they will continue to support the Assad regime. And thirdly, you have Russia. And Russia is making it no secret that they're continuing to support Assad and provide him with every kind of weaponry and all kinds of air fighters and missiles to be used against the Syrian people. So what we're talking about here is not a new international intervention. What we're talking about here is bringing some balance to the region. Is bringing some balance, is leveling the ground so that the allies of the Assad realize that continuing to support Assad will not result in anything but the targeting of your own regional assets and interests in the region. We want to be able to send a strong message to the allies of Assad that their support should not continue. That the Assad strikes against the Syrian people will not go unpunished. The second point why I would support this kind of an intervention is that we need to realize as an international community, as people living in the US, in Canada and the West in general, that the Syrian people at this point feel really betrayed. The Syrian people started their struggle thinking that the free world will support their pursuit of dignity and freedom and democracy. And at this point they have realized that they're trapped in a situation where they're continuously being targeted by the Assad, by all kinds of weapons, including internationally banned chemical weapons. These people have absolutely nothing to defend themselves but very limited resources. They have to fight back to protect their kids. They have to fight back to protect their women. And they're begging the world, they're literally begging the world at this point, please stop the madness of Bashar Assad and his allies. Please stop the madness of this criminal regime. Stop the massacres, stop the bloodshed. We do not want another war. We want to stop the already ongoing war in Syria. And how does the world respond in return? Silence from one side. Then you've got debates, conferences, conventions, talks, arguments back and forth, while the death toll in Syria is increasing every single hour. For the past 2.5 years, the Syrian people have made it very clear. The Syrian people have made it very clear that they want the international community to intervene to protect the civilians in Syria. This is the demand of the Syrian people. They realize that the Arab League has failed them. They realize that the Security Council cannot reach a resolution because of Russia's and China's veto. And now they're begging for a new coalition to move on its own. We need to respect that we need to have the courage to stand up behind our values of dignity and freedom and the right of the Syrian people to self-determination. The third point I'd like to discuss today is that we all realize that intervention does not always end well. We all admit that. We all acknowledge that. We keep reminding ourselves of Iraq. We keep saying that Syria is going to be another Iraq. But we need to understand that intervention, if done right, can save hundreds of thousands of lives. We have done it before in Kosovo. We have done it before in Bosnia. We have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And we have done it before and just recently in Libya. Can you imagine for a second, and I would like you to consider this very seriously, can you imagine for a second if we have let Gaddafi continue killing his own people? We would have had another Syria to deal with right now. But thank God, the international community, with a concerted effort, stopped Gaddafi, stopped his madness. Now we don't have to imagine, by the way, because we have real-life examples of situations where the international community did not intervene, and we regretted that decision so much. The Americans and even Canada and Europe until today regret and publicly apologize for not intervening in Rwanda, where 20% of the population were killed in the civil war. And what were our excuses then? Guess what? The same exact excuses we have today. That the Americans have an agenda, Europeans have an agenda, that it's too complicated for us to intervene, that we're not going to support extremists. Same exact rhetoric over and over again. Finally, I beg you, no matter what your counter-argument is to this war, do not tell me, let's wait for a political solution. Because thing is, we did try political solutions. The Arab League tried, the United Nations tried, the European delegations tried, and no one succeeded. Do you know why? For two reasons. First, Assad and his allies want any political resolution to include Assad and to guarantee a safe exit for all war criminals in Syria. And the Syrian people will never accept this. Do you know why? Because this regime, the Syrian regime, has documented history of retaliating against its opposition. They have documented the history of retaliating against everybody who has a different opinion. This will only buy the regime more time to gain control on the ground, using its force, and finally more bloodshed and massacres. The second reason political solutions will not work with the Syrian regime, and I want you to think about this very seriously and take it home with you, is that there is absolutely no intention for the Syrian regime to solve this politically. Do you know why? Because Assad, for the past 2.5 years, have been killing people, have been massacring children and women in cities, have been shelling cities and towns and wiping complete villages off the ground. He used chemical weapons multiple times with absolutely no consequences. There's absolutely no consequences to the crimes and massacres that Assad has committed. So why on earth would Assad agree to sit on the negotiation table? Why on earth would Assad agree to a political solution?
3 minutes.
By this military intervention, we would like to send Assad a very strong message that you cannot continue killing your own people without punishment. That you cannot continue killing your own people thinking that there are no consequences. The world will hold you accountable. The free world will stop you, and we will all be against you. And by the way, military intervention has proven to be a way towards a peaceful and political solution in Bosnia, when all parties have been pushed to agree to the Dayton Agreement. Finally, I would like to conclude with this. According to UN, Syrians are being killed at a rate of 5,000 people every single month. We're talking 5,000 people every single month. At such a rate, we cannot afford to wait for a political solution to emerge from nowhere. Waiting for one more year means 60,000 people adding to the death toll in Syria. Unfortunately, and I'm really sad to say this, but unfortunately at this point, any action in Syria is better than inaction. Any action in Syria is better than inaction. Skeptics keeps telling us, what are the chances that these strikes will save civilians? 50%? 40? 30? 10%? Well, I'll tell you something. I agree with you. Chances may not be high. And I cannot guarantee that the military strike against the Syrian regime will protect civilians in Syria. But I can guarantee one thing. I can guarantee that if we don't act immediately, if we don't act today to protect the civilians, chances that we are protecting the civilians are absolutely zero. Thank you very much for listening.